Hey guys, Alex here, welcome to this slow-paced tutorial. Today we're gonna be making a chasmosaurus. It's this cute little guy over here, and I have a few references gathered in the PureRef app. I recommend you get this, it's super useful. And as you can see, I have a few skeleton references. This one is gonna be my main inspiration because I really like the colors of it and how cute he looks. And I also have some 3D models from this fun little game here. I recommend this as well, I've played a little. And I also have this reference that we can use to trace over it in the beginning and help us out a little. Alright, so without further delay, let's just go straight into a new project file in Blender. And the first thing we're gonna do is come over here, press this little arrow or N on our keyboard, and go to the view panel, change the focal length from 50 to 120. The reason we do this, I can demonstrate over here. This is just a free skeleton model I found on the internet. I didn't make this, although I wish I had. So if we zoom in really close, you can see how the face kind of becomes distorted, especially compared to an orthographic view. And you cannot see the side of the skull when in perspective. If we go further down to something like, say, maybe 10, you see that it just, it becomes really funky and you cannot work like this, guys. If you have a distorted view, everything you're gonna be making is gonna be distorted. And this is just one of the reasons why a lot of your sculpts may not look as good as they can look. So if we just go to 120, see what happens. See, we're in perspective, but it looks almost identical to orthographic. The face doesn't get so much distortion, you can see the side of the skull pretty well. And this is what we want. We want some perspective combined with an orthographic view, right? So a near orthographic view with a little bit of perspective into it. Let's turn this project off because we have no use for it, and let's come over here, turn this window, this panel off, and we're just gonna go to our side orthographic view and drag in this little reference here, which might help us out in the beginning. Alright, so let's make sure that it's aligned to the center and just snap the selection to cursor and just press G, Z, move it upwards a bit, about where the y-axis line is. And let's subdivide our cube a couple of times. We don't want much resolution at the start, 2 subdivisions will be enough. Let's apply the modifier, and this will be good for us to start with. Let's bring it about here, and let's go straight into the sculpting workspace. Go back to our orthographic, enable symmetry, and let's use the elastic deform to start tracing over this dinosaur's body. And we just drag this out here, drag this all the way to the tail, and we can press Alt Z and go into our X-ray view, and we can just start working from here. 2 important things to keep in mind is, first, learn how to play with brush sizes. See, I'm going back and forth between different sizes, and that gives me better control over the geometry, over what I'm doing. The other thing to keep in mind is that I'm using a tablet and that you really should be using a tablet. You might be saying and thinking to yourself that you're pretty good at sculpting without a tablet, and I believe you are, I trust you, but you gotta trust me that you really need a tablet. It's like having a brush when you're painting. You can paint with your fingers too, but maybe it's not the best way to paint. And trust me, guys, I used to be sculpting without a tablet for about a year, and that was time not well spent. Alright, so we just already have a basic rough body shape for our little dino, and let's add another cube, subdivide it, and apply a subdivision, and this time I'm just gonna move this over here and make a duplication of this so we don't go through this whole process again. And let's just scale it down a little. Whenever you scale something in object mode, make sure that you press Ctrl A and S to set the scale. This way you can avoid some funky problems with sculpting. And again go into sculpting and enable symmetry and go to transparent view and start bringing this forward. Now notice that I'm not pressing too hard on it, I'm not doing any huge movements. I'm just kind of going with it. You know, we don't worry too much at this stage because it's such an early stage. These are so rough shapes, we can just change them however we want and there's nothing to worry about here. Now, one thing to pay attention here is I'm not gonna go all the way to the front where the beak is, and the reason why is because I'm not gonna be using this mesh to make the beak. I'm gonna be using some different object, maybe a cube, maybe a sphere, we'll see. But I'm gonna have it as a separate object for a little while. The reason why is because, see, they seem to be separated from the rest of the head. They're not covered by this muscle and skin and fat and all that stuff. The same for the horns and those spikes here. And the same for the eye. See, when you're making the eye, you're gonna be using another object, right? You're not just gonna be sculpting a dot over your head shape. And this is the same logic here. We're just gonna be using another object to make the beak. And then we're gonna be joining them together, and that's gonna give us a much better result in the end. So let's just keep working on this a little. And remember to go back and forth between your different brush sizes. It becomes second nature after a while, but maybe at first you have to keep this in mind. You don't want to be stuck with the same size for too long, just play around with it a little. You'll see it's gonna be of great help to you if you just go back and forth between different sizes. And I think we already have some nice rough shape here, and let's just for now disable this, hide this reference and go to the front view, which looks like a big mess, but that's okay because we can just adjust this pretty easily. And let's do some detective work here to determine the width of the head, this frill or crest shape, and the width of the body. If we look at our skeleton and 3D model here, you can see that the size of the skull is pretty much the same width as the rib cage. Or if we include the legs as well and all the fat and skin and the muscles, maybe it's maybe the skull is about half the size of the entire width of the body. And this frill over here, if we could just move it downwards, it would be as high and as wide as the entire body. It would cover the entire dinosaur. So let's keep those things in mind. And one other thing to keep in mind is that the beak is the narrowest point, and it just widens as we go towards the back and the base of the skull. And we also have this ridge over here, right? So let's try to get those shapes in. And this is why references are important and why you have to be doing a little bit of detective work and be a little bit observant whenever you're looking at your references. Try to determine those shapes from the start. So let's just start by making this more narrow. Let's maybe increase the size of the brush. There we go. Something like this. Something like this. And let's just widen this and this. Again, these are very rough shapes because we don't have a lot of geometry and we really don't need much at the start. Just getting the basic shape down. And I think that's looking pretty good already, but let's see if we can just maybe have a bit of a ridge here. bring those in. Oh yes, see how you get this ridge effect now? This is what we want. Alright, I think this is looking pretty good, and let's just let's go over to our edit settings and untick this box, this lock object modes. This will allow us, by pressing Alt and left click, to go between different objects. And let's just go into sculpting, and remember how we said that the body is almost as wide as the head, so let's just bring this inwards like this. And it's important to move around your mesh, your sculpt. You don't want to be too sticky on one side. You know, you are in 3D, you should be taking advantage of that fact and move around as much as you can. And let's bring those lines inwards so we can have some sort of spine shape happening here. This is looking pretty good, and I want to make this neck area a little bit more defined for now. And we can always change these shapes around as we move on. Let's see. Let's bring our reference back here and go to transparent. Alright, let's choose our head. It's also a good idea to rename them, but I'm a bit too lazy for that now. But what the heck, let's rename them. Let's make this head, and let's make this the body. Alright, and I think we are doing pretty well. Let's just hide our reference, and what we're gonna do now is we're gonna make the tail. So go to object mode, go to orthographic, make a duplication of our sphere, scale it down, and scale it along the y-axis. And this is why it's important to set the scale whenever you do some crazy scaling like this, because if we go back to sculpting now, you see we get this warning, there's a non-uniform scale, and the brush doesn't quite work right. So back to object, Control A, S, set the scale, and when go to sculpt now, there is no warning, everything is working fine. So let's just bring this up a little, bring this down a little. You can also use the grab brush, it doesn't make much of a difference. I prefer to use the elastic deform for these early stages. And let's bring it inwards a bit, because if you notice here, our dinosaur doesn't have a long tail, has a short, cute little tail, and I want to keep this design. So let's just bring it inwards a bit, and maybe press shift and lightly go over it, smoothing it out a little, like this. Maybe like this. Yeah, I think this is looking pretty good. Alright, and let's just make another duplication of this, and let's start working on the legs. We're gonna be scaling this down about this size and bring it out on the x-axis, about here. Alright, back to orthographic and move it upwards a bit, and let's look at our references. And this is where anatomy becomes important, guys, and why you should be spending some time studying anatomy. You don't have to learn every bone and every muscle name. You just need to be able to read anatomy. What does that mean? It means that if we look at our design here, what we mostly see is the superficial surface. So just the layer of skin and all the details on the skin. But beneath all that there is a layer of fat, and beneath the fat there is a layer of muscle, and beneath the muscle there's the base structure, which is the bone structure. And the reason why anatomy is important is because if you look closely here, you can determine a few things, like you can determine that there is a long shoulder blade here. that there is a hole in the skull. Maybe it's not, this design is not very scientifically accurate, but you know, let's go with it. I think maybe he was, this dinosaur was a bit chubbier, maybe like a hippo. But you can see the same hole here, you can see the long shoulder blade, and if you know how to read the underlying structure of something, the skeleton and the muscle and all that, you can determine a lot of things, and you can look at this and understand what the skeleton looks like, or you can look at the skeleton and understand where the muscles and everything else would be. So this is why it's important. And if we look here, again we have this long shoulder blade, and let's try to recreate this. Into sculpt mode, and let's just move it around, maybe enable symmetry again and move it around to be the shape that we want to have. You could be doing all that in edit mode, but I don't like edit mode. I prefer sculpting. I really love sculpting, and this is where I spend most of my time. You don't have to go into edit mode if you don't want to. Alright, I think this shape is good enough. Let's confirm this. And maybe on our model the angle is a bit too high, so let's just rotate this. Actually, there is a rotate function in sculpt mode. If you scroll down here, you can just find the rotate, and we can just rotate it like this. That's pretty useful. And I think that's closer, maybe just a little bit more. Yeah. And maybe just move it downwards a little. Again, you can do it from sculpt mode. You can just use this one and just move it downwards, and maybe a little bit here. Again, we don't care too much because we can change those things whenever we want. And let's do some observation here and see that the shoulder blade is almost the same size as this bone over here. Again, we don't care about the names. I think this is the humerus, but we really don't care what they are called. We just want to be able to read them, just understand their shapes. And also, including the feet and the fingers and everything, I think this is also about the same size as everything else. So we can just make a copy of this shoulder blade to create the rest of the feet. Let's do that now. Let's duplicate it, move it down, rotate it about here and bring it back. I think that should be alright. And you can just change it how you want. You can give it another pose if you want. Bring it a bit forward or more backwards and have the other leg going forward. But I'm gonna keep it symmetrical for this particular tutorial, and I'm gonna have it about here, I think. Yeah, that looks good to me. And let's make another duplication of this, rotate it the other way, bring it downwards like this. I think that's good. Maybe just move this upwards a bit. Yeah, I think this is looking okay. Let's compare our sculpt with the references. And I think the shape is fine for now. Again, we'll be changing all that stuff around as we go along. Actually, one thing I might want to do is, he seems a little bit short to me, so I'm just gonna be moving everything except the legs a bit upwards, and maybe, just maybe, move the legs upwards a bit too, just a little bit. Like this. You know, this is why those basic shapes are very useful, because we can change a lot here, and we don't have this fine control over the rest of the process. So take advantage of it now. while you still have it. Alright, and let's just make the hind legs as well. Let's take our sphere over here, let's make a duplication of this, bring it here, scale it down about this size, and bring it on the x-axis about here. And let's just go into sculpt mode, and with our elastic deform, let's try to give it the shape that we see here. And you're gonna notice that this bone is a little bit longer than the shoulder blade and this bone here, and that the knee goes up towards the end of the belly. So let's just keep those things in mind while we change the shape of this. Bring it about here where the end of the belly is, just a little bit below the belly, and maybe widen it a little, because you can see that it's a pretty wide, big leg, has lots of muscle in it, and it takes a considerable part of the body size. Alright, so we have to bring it upwards a bit, because we have to consider that this limb is attached to the pelvis and the muscle here is also attached to the pelvis. So let's bring it about here and go to orthographic again. It helps being in orthographic in this early stage, although you go back and forth between perspective and orthographic, but orthographic kind of helps you to keep everything in the correct position. Let's bring this outwards a bit, like this. And again, notice that I'm playing around with the different sizes of the brush again, never staying on one size too long. Alright, so I think this is about the same size as this and the shoulder blade, so let's make a copy of that right here, and just, there we go, bring it outwards a bit, like this, and sure, I like this, maybe just give it a bit of a rotation and bring it backwards a bit. Alright, and for the final part, the feet, let's just duplicate this again, scale it down like this, maybe scale it along the y-axis a little and squeeze it down on the z-axis. And we can hide this now, and remember to apply the scale and maybe move it forward a bit. Alright, into sculpt mode, let's go closer and bring this, let's enable symmetry, bring this upwards like this, bring this part downwards, and just try to get a bit of a foot shape here happening. Again, we don't care too much because we can change them around. And let's also widen it a bit, make it a bit bigger, because if you notice those back feet are much bigger than the front. See, they are much bigger. So let's just try to do something about that. So let's just move it on the x-axis a little, like this, and then sculpt mode and just make it a bit bigger. Go to orthographic and raise this part a little, because you can see here that they're kind of raised up. So let's just do this. There we go. Like this. Alright, let's move to this front limb and just give it a little bit of a foot shape as well. Something like this. Alright, that's pretty good. Okay, so the final thing we're gonna do for this part is we're just gonna be mirroring all those parts to the other side. Now you can, if you want, you can just join them by selecting them all and just pressing Ctrl J, and you can just use the mirror modifier to get them on the other side of the body. But if you want to be changing the shape or the pose of your little guy, so maybe you want a bit of a different style, maybe he's walking or something, he has this foot forward, and then in that case you just want to be mirroring each part separately. But let's keep it simple for this one, and we can delve into more complicated stuff further down the line. But for now, let's just keep it simple. Let's join all those parts together and join the hind limbs as well into the same object, and let's just mirror each limb to the other side of the body. There we go. And let's just compare this to our reference here and see if we have the proportions done correctly. And I think there are a few things we can change. Maybe we can make the body a little bit wider or bring the legs outwards a bit. And of course the head here is more raised up like this, and that's okay. We can do that later on if we want. This actually looks a bit more impressive, but we can change that around in the next episode. I don't want to make this too long, guys. Like I said, this is a really slow paced because I just want to remove a lot of the anxiety that goes with sculpting sometimes. By the way, let's delete those things. I don't know why we kept them here. We don't want them here. Yeah, I just want to remove some of the anxiety with it because sculpting is a lot of fun, and this early stage with the basic shapes is where you should be spending most of your time, because you can just change so much and you have so much control that you don't have later on. So don't worry too much about if it's looking as you want it to look right now. You know, it should be looking like a big pile of mess. Alright, this is how your sculpt is gonna be looking for the bigger part of your time, right? It's gonna start coming along in the final stages. So let's do one final thing here. Let's just go into sculpt mode and just bring this part a little bit inwards and go to our tail shape here and just bring that inwards a little bit as well, like this. There we go. Alright, so this is just the rough shape. This is a good beginning, and yeah guys, just come and sculpt along with me. Have a bit of fun with it. You don't have to take it too seriously, don't worry too much about it. You see, we can just keep going back and forth, changing whatever we want to get a close approximation of the final shape that we're going for. But don't worry too much about it. This is a fun process. It's a fun stage of the sculpting process. Alright, so I'm gonna leave this here and I'm gonna be picking it up right from this stage and moving forward to joining them together and giving it a bit more resolution and just going into more refined work. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something and that you had fun with it, and you come sculpt along with me and have fun with sculpting. I'll see you on the next one, guys. Bye bye now.